Hello and welcome to the War Report. That is way too enthusiastic tone for the subject matters of today because, look, I'm not going to say it's blackpilling, but it kind of is. And you know what? Some good may come out of it. Some things may happen differently. This show is known for getting thrown curveballs, but we can only hope for the best. I'll wait for some viewers to pour in. But for those of you listening afterwards, I'll give you a little preview about where we're going to get up to today. So we're going to be talking about Congress meddling with Trump's troops withdrawal, whether it be Afghanistan or South Korea or, of course, Syria. A second Korean summit's on the table. Unfortunately, the INF is going to fall through. There's some progress on the trade war. Salvini is under fire for doing his job, and I think color revolutions are going to hit Europe again. The Ukrainian elections are actually 2 months. They will be on March 31st. And of course, we have more news coming out of the wonderful, just advanced utopia of Venezuela and how wonderful it is. And they'll definitely be able to govern themselves by the time we're done with it. They won't revert to what they had before we got there. Trust me, absolutely, I am right with that one. And you know what, Max Boot, Bill Kristol, they all agree with me. So they have great track records, don't they?
When has he ever been wrong?
Absolutely never. Bill Kristol, he's like the Nostradamus of our generation. But to get out started with our news stories, the Congress has passed a resolution, both in the House and the Senate, veto-proof. I didn't find the House's exact votes, but the Senate voted 68 to 32 to stifle Trump's withdrawal plans from Afghanistan, Syria, and South Korea. Now, this was specifically focused on Afghanistan and Syria, adding it to the Middle East security bill. So it's not official policy yet, but if this bill passes, it most likely will.
Yeah, I am kind of. Last show we weren't certain, about whether the pullout was for real, and it does look like it's for real. So I am happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, Congress wouldn't be this raging if it was like a psych.
Yeah, I know. It's
Yeah,
delicious.
and
It's delicious watching them get this angry about it.
yeah, I have some further comments on that, so I'm glad you brought that up. Now, this comes after murmurs coming from, of course, your people like John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, and the usual suspects saying, "Oh, maybe we should leave a small permanent contingency of a couple hundred troops to counter the entire Iranian forces in Syria because that'll definitely do it. Just those couple hundred troops." It crumble all of Iran and all of Iranian-backed groups in Syria. Trust me, it'll work. But honestly, as you pretty much pointed out, the withdrawal from Syria has become a war in and of itself. Now, will the withdrawal happen? Honestly, I'm going to be honest at this point. Who the hell knows at this point?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm tentatively betting that there will be a withdrawal because I think they've exhausted every false flag they've got.
Yeah,
Protecting.
I think
Like,
they've
go ahead.
Sorry.
I think protecting any of the rebels is now verboten. Everybody knows that they've gone back and forth with ISIS and Al Qaeda, Al Nusra.
The Kurds.
The Kurds, that's really fallen out of the news cycle. That to me says that essentially they've kind of given up. They're going to for the remainder. They're going to continue to protect some of the jihadists in Syria to make trouble. But the truth is, the most important parts of Syria are under Assad control, and basically America can no longer wait, to strike a pipeline deal that suits its sphere. And I think that's what's made it untenable for them to remain there.
Yeah, I would agree. Pretty much Israel's fears have been put to rest despite the, occasional strikes because Russia, more or less, their odd relationship with Israel. Russia basically has the Syrians on a leash, so the point where they won't do anything. Turkey, that's an interesting thing. Granted, Turkey has also turned towards the Russians in that front. The Kurds, nobody really takes them seriously. And pretty much all these other rebel groups have been exhausted, defeated by either each other or Assad's forces or any other pro-government forces. Now, what I find funny is the fact that, we've pretty much exhausted all political capital and all false flags to the point where, you remember for the couple weeks after we announced it, there was reports of ISIS attacks every day.
Yeah.
Again, none of those stuck except the four where the one where four U.S. soldiers got killed. But I say that had the opposite than intended effect.
I agree. I agree. It did not cause the outrage that everybody thought it would. There is no more political capital to remain
Yeah,
in.
it actually caused the opposite outrage. I saw like a lot of normie accounts on Twitter saying, "Look, they wouldn't have died if they weren't there in the first place. Trump's right. We need to get out."
I know. I remember that.
Yeah. A lot of people I would think like, "Oh yeah, you're a shill. You're taken in by all the propaganda they shove down your throat." And it's like, "Oh wow, you're making sense. That's how obvious this has become." It's like I feel vindicated. And you see all these polls you pointed out. Republicans overwhelmingly support it. Democrats, it's like barely a minority. It's like a 47% minority to the point where not even the Democratic establishment can get their base on board with this. Independents support it like 58 to 40 something, but it's popular pretty much amongst every major voting group.
Yeah. I think even people who want to remain in Syria, really, it's a counter to Trump rather than they don't have a cohesive idea of how and why they're going to succeed in Syria or
Well, 300
Afghanistan for
years.
that
Max
matter.
Boot told me it'll take 300 years.
300 years. What's 300 years in the life of an empire?
Oh, absolutely.
It's about a third, actually.
Oh, yeah,
Sometimes
that's
half.
a good point. But he unironically said that, saying, "Oh, it took the British 300 years to subjugate India." It's like, oh, well, you know what? Look how that worked out for them. Now,
And
how
now,
many curry shops do you have in London?
right, there's actually more people of Indian descent living in Britain. That's a fraction of the size than Britain's ever lived in India.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like,
So,
of course, Max Boot would be happy with that outcome for the U.S.
oh, absolutely. It's not like he has it. He'll use the phrases like "we" and "we're" when it comes to this country. When he's not, he's a first generation immigrant. He was born in the Soviet Union of a certain group that we're not necessarily allowed to discuss, but I think you could probably deduce based on those clues. But for some more positive news, I mean that was a bit of a muddled story. So Syria, there's a lot of positives, a lot of negatives. But like you said, I think we're gonna have to get out just for pragmatic reasons, just for the case of, yeah, we can't stay any longer. This isn't going to work out. Or else, of course, they'd be pushing it. But on the bright side, it looks like we may actually get a second Korea summit. Now, one of the areas where Trump hasn't faltered lately on pretty much anything is the Korea issue. Things have been going well. Now, not between North Korea and the United States necessarily, but between the entire situation in general, the two Koreas, all that's doing good. And preparations are actually underway as we speak. From yesterday to today, you had Mike Pompeo meeting with North Korean officials to hammer out deals for a summit that will likely be at the end of February. Now, Director of National Intelligence criticized Trump for this. His name is Dan Coates. He's one of the many assortment swamp monsters. And he said that North Korea still has nuke lines. North Korea still has missile lines. And it's funny because Trump actually hit back saying, the intelligence community should really go back to school.
Yeah, that's right. The truth is they're making progress right now. And again, all of this is really part of the never Trump thing. Japan is already rearming its military. It's putting some teeth back into it. I think America has decided that successively over the years that Japan will be the naval counter to China. And not just the sea, but probably will also play an influence in Korea. To some extent. And I think the Koreas now both have a certain amount of autonomy because there is this kind of retraction that's happening. So I think it's just a lot of hot air. Like really, these people are upset that Trump got in, and the reasons that they're upset he got in most of the time don't have anything to do with geopolitics.
Oh, absolutely not. But it's interesting because as much as Trump falters on, like I said, pretty much everything from domestic to foreign policy to immigration, all of that, these people are still mad at him, even though his arm is being twisted so far. He's pretty much just doing a slightly watered down version of whatever they want.
Yeah, right. I mean, and in a sense, for a lot of these people, Obama was supposed to be the bomb that would heal America. In a way, there was, I think, with many of these. people, these types in America, in like recent American history, I would say post 60s. I think there was always an expectation that America would have a black president and that the country would finally be united and healed and so on. And the perception is that Trump is the exact opposite of that, that progress, which was supposed to occur, has been stopped. And that's really where this countering is coming from. Had Hillary done the same things, of course, the GOP would have gone insane, but the Democrats would have supported her. The real conflict is inside America, not outside.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting because you say that about Obama. He was pretty much the end game of the neoliberals. They thought this is our final card, this is our final move until we have global domination until the end of time. That's the amount of hubris and arrogance these people had. They thought, oh, we can just pull out this suave-looking minority man who will heal America's racial divide, who will assert America and liberalism as the ruling ideology until the sun implodes and we get sucked into a black hole.
Right.
That's what
It's
these
it's
people
the end of
honestly believe.
history. It's the end of
Yeah,
history. Right, right.
but
It's been solved. The neoliberalism solves all the societal problems. It's all over. We got the best neoliberal president anyone could ask for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
they played their cards way too early. Honestly, it's funny enough, in 2008, they would have been better off actually going with Hillary Clinton at that point.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
I
yeah,
was actually surprised by that, to be honest.
yeah, they played their cards too early. They thought they could have gotten it, but they should have played them like right now, like as things are. But of course, you can't change the past. You don't know how it would be. But another thing about the Korean summit, the U.S. goal is, of course, to push for inspections of North Korean sites. Now, proposed locations for the summit are actually pretty interesting. You have Hawaii, which I figured they would have done it on more neutral soil, Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore again, which I think would be the most logical option.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, but it's actually looking optimistic for the next North Korea summit now. And there's even been like the small jabs, like how we test the waters with each other that happened before the first summit. That's been happening over the past few weeks. Uh, Kim Jong Un made some comments about U.S. military policy. We made some comments about Kim Jong Un's nukes, and so as odd as that may sound, that's actually a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, has everybody forgotten he's not firing? Not that anybody really should have been afraid of those missiles being fired toward Japan. I mean, that was just show. Um, I mean, when's the last time you saw one of those fly?
Oh, it's since 2017.
Right, but it's been over a year and a half.
Yeah, it's been almost 2 years at this point, actually.
Right. So since the summits, nothing of the sort has repeated itself.
Oh, absolutely. And another point I was going to make is it's actually interesting because with the reconciliation in Korea, we've reached an interesting point where you almost have a Mexican standoff in Asia where China, Korea, and Japan, none of them like each other. And it's kind of like they're all aiming at each other. They both have the two guns. I'm sure you've all seen the old westerns where they do that, and pretty much keeping each other all in check. China isn't going to go too far on land because Korea is going to be there. They're not going to go too far in the sea because Japan's going to be there. Same for Japan. And yeah, it's actually worked out pretty well, keeping them all at each other's throats, despite only one of them being a nuclear power.
Right, and I think China's destiny, I think, is to create the so-called Belt Road, the new Silk Road, as it were, because like I think it's posturing toward. It's more than posturing towards the China Sea, but I think that is a kind of perhaps a backup option, and
Yeah, and
manufacturers are going to be leaving China. And I think China is going to start looking towards a more direct route towards Europe and Russia, vis-a-vis Central Asia. I think
yeah,
that's where it's ultimately going. I mean, it's going to take at least a decade, but that is where I think they're headed.
I would say the biggest Chinese holdback from that is I think they fear confrontation with Russia if they try to go into Central Asia. And like I said, we've been predicting this on the show for months that as soon as America retreats, whether by our own will or by the fact that we can sustain this empire any longer, which unfortunately, as we'll get into later, is probably going to be the latter one of the two. Russia and China, again, their very fragile friendship will fall apart. I'm not saying they'll go to all-out war, but I think you're going to see a lot of trickery and games in Central Asia between Russia and China in the near future, in the coming decades.
Yeah, that's possible. That's possible. I didn't get like from having gone to Russia several times. I don't get that sense there. I get that it's maybe a more serious relationship than that. I could be wrong. I can't compare it
Well,
to Soviet Russia.
I can agree with that, but things I believe things will deteriorate without the U.S. pushing it together. I'm sure the U.S. pushing it together has forged stronger ties, but I don't
Right.
see it lasting beyond that.
Right. The coalition is convenient
Yeah,
to a
and
great extent. They do need each other,
that
and
also
probably will
depends
need each
on
other for another 10 years.
yeah, and that also depends on moves in Europe. Like if the populist bloc wins, like if your Salvini's and Orban wins and Europe becomes more willing to work with the Russians, or at least part of Europe, they'll probably view China as less of a necessity. But if the European Union, by some freak chance, stays alive or anti-Russian sentiments in Europe still dominate, that's not going to happen. They're going to go back to the Chinese.
Right. China does have an enormous trade with Europe. Very a huge trading partner with Germany. So yeah, it will be interesting. I wouldn't doubt it if Russia actually makes makes concessions or deals with Europe.
Yeah, Russia's walked itself into a win-win situation because if things with China fall out and things with Europe work out, they're good. But if things with Europe don't improve, China's right there.
Yeah, I was thinking about that this week as well. And I guess we can bring that. We'll talk about that later in terms of how that relates to Venezuela.
Yeah, and I'm going to be quick with this one because we've pretty much rehashed all of what's there. But the withdrawal from the INF is likely going to happen tomorrow. Now, after months of stumbling around the U.S., we've decided to finally leave the INF. Now, for this, Trump has earned the praise of the neocons and NATO officials. You know, great friends to have, if you ask me. Now, we've discussed this semi regularly since October, since the announcement was made that we may be leaving it. And the treaty has not been honored by either side pretty much since its inception. Now, I still roll my eyes and get annoyed at the fact we're leaving. And I don't think it's like doomsday or anything, but it's just still annoying. It's frustrating. You can probably tell by the tone of my voice. But leaving this treaty will actually trigger a 6-month period until the treaty's terms are actually just completely invalidated. Now, Mikhail Gorbachev, of all people, who I was actually surprised to learn was still alive, said he was baffled by the U.S. decision to leave. Now, keep in mind, Gorbachev was one of the original people who actually drew up this treaty. And look, for all his faults, for his governing of the Soviet Union and his past, he has been very encouraging and very conducive of talks between Russia and the U.S. So you can give that to him at least. Now, many also theorize, which this isn't necessarily 40 chess or anything, this actually does make a lot of sense, that we are scrapping this treaty so we can move missiles in range of China, and also considering the fact the original treaty did not include China in it. And of course, Russia has the Asian end, so getting the missiles too close there would also violate the treaty. Not like we haven't violated in Europe already, to whose interest, I don't know. Now, like I said, this is a dumb move overall, drawn up likely by Bolton and Pompeo. Now, as I said earlier, will this lead to anything worse? Doubtful. Am I happy? No.
Yeah, I would echo the same thing. It's just symbolically the
It's
wrong
bad
move.
form.
It's bad form, yeah. Substantially, there's not much is going to change, but if we're thinking about better relations down the road, it's not a good start.
Yeah, and you know what?
It's a setback.
Under normal circumstances, if Trump's foreign policy, like I said, in recent weeks, it looks like it's being very hamstrung. But if we had like his summer 2018 foreign policy where it looked like he actually had a solid grasp over it, I would be more optimistic about this. I'd be like, oh, they're going to sit down, they're going to hammer something out. But now that it seems like Bolton and Pompeo are really clinging on to dear life for power and seem to have succeeded, at least for now, I fear the prospects of any kind of renegotiation or any kind of new treaty. And I think U.S.-Russian relations, I don't think they're going to get substantially worse, but I think they're going to be on the rocks for a while, thanks to the fact that Trump has been surrounded by subverters. That's
Hmm.
honestly what you call them.
Yeah, I would agree.
But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll get a Helsinki too. Maybe they'll hammer out some treaty there. But again, I'm not holding my breath. But Trump has surprised me before.
Well,
That's pretty
according
much
to
the theme of
Vanity,
this.
yeah, well,
Pretty
according to
much this
Vanity
entire
Fair,
show.
Trump can't stop talking to Putin in close quarters. There was a ridiculous article yesterday in Vanity Fair about uh, Trump can't stop meeting with Putin. It's just outrageous. It even referred to Putin as
Yeah, it's
Comrade
like
Vlad. It's just so cringy. It's absolute like
aside from Helsinki, all of the meetings have been hamstrung.
yeah, I know.
Yeah, I wish the U.S. and Russia were close as the liberals saw a better position if that were the case.
Hmm.
I will move on. Um, Now, as I said at the top of the show, there's been more progress in the trade war. Fortunately, not necessarily to my liking, but again, I'll take it. Now, Trump seems rather optimistic about U.S. Chinese trade talks after meeting with Chinese Premier Liu. I said, but many times I don't want to deal with China from them. I want to move assets, move them to places like just India or Vietnam or hell, even Japan or Korea. But China pretty much is my point. Now,
Right,
East
about one third
and
of Chinese
Liu,
companies. Sorry, go ahead.
Trump and G20 in for China markets more U.S. agricultural goods.
You're
Yeah,
you're you're
China.
breaking up,
We're pretty
Constantine.
much pushing China to open up their markets more to Yuanzhar, a Huawei company.
Right. I caught only about maybe 60% of that. You were breaking up, but I think that's what I was referring to. China will try to form something in Central Asia because America is going to create incentives for foreign companies manufacturing in China to leave it, as you pointed out. So that's going to be a shift. That's the Pacific counter, if you will. Hello. Hey guys, so I think we've lost Constantine, but he'll be back really shortly. Let me know if there's any questions you want to field. We'll see if we can fit them in. Um, so if you like, you can write them down in the chat. Here we go. I think he's back. Thanks for waiting, guys. Constantine,
Hey, sorry about that.
that's all
Let me
right.
go ahead and kick this other one. I don't know how that happened. There we go. Yeah, technical difficulties. That was actually one of the more interesting ones. But, yeah, as you were saying about, was it like QAI, the company you were referring to?
Right, and just like China's at a point right now where it's developed its own companies, and they're competing extremely well against Western companies. Like, even their products are actually really good. Like the 13-inch Huawei MateBook or whatever. Yeah, it's a bit of a ripoff of the of Apple's, but it's actually like more powerful for less. So they've upped their game, and in a way, they're already approaching sort of the end of the season where lots of Western companies and other companies from all over the world flock to China as a manufacturing magnet. And now I think we're going to see a shift, not least of which will be for probably lower wages, to other Pacific Rim countries, like you mentioned, Philippines, India, but several others. That to me spells for China that they have to then find other markets and go more inland as a as a Eurasian or land power rather than a sea power.
Yeah, yeah. And you think after years of manufacturing Apple products, they didn't steal the designs of them? You're kidding yourself if you think that's true.
Right, of course. So they've, their phone technology is actually really good. They're even, uh, finding their own innovations here and there. So, in a way, the time has come for a parting. You could say.
Yeah, I would agree. But I just saw this on Twitter. This is semi-breaking news, but I saw from our favorite resistor, Ed Krasenstein. He tweets in all caps, Trump just lost bigly. The Republican-led Senate voted 68 to 23 to advance a measure that opposes Trump's attempts to withdraw from Syria and Afghanistan. Another loss for Trump, another win for America.
He's insane.
Yeah, I just had to point that out because it just fits very well in the topics we were discussing previously. But those people are jokes. I could do an entire show about them, but that's aside the point. But yeah, as you said, back on topic, China pretty much, yeah, they played us like a fiddle out of our arrogance, out of our hubris. The neoliberals thought that China would be content being a manufacturing colony until the end of time, that fabled end of history that nobody brings up now, but that they love to bring up the 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, they thought, oh yeah, China, they'll be happy. We'll sustain their economy just by building all our consumer goods there. And then all of a sudden, it's like they're building their own consumer goods. They're expanding their markets. They're going to Africa. They're going to Central Asia. Who would have seen this coming? Pretty
Yeah, I
much
mean,
anyone with a brain.
did they forget that we're like a massive power at one time? They had a civilization going when Europe was just barely getting started. Like people are crazy. These people have a long tradition. They have a long history, and they have a lot of ambition to rise back in prominence. They weren't, and of course, a lot of this was done to counter Russia as well.
Yeah, yeah.
In Europe. So
Kissinger and Nixon's pivot to China, trying to open it up, like ice out the Soviet Union. Actually, interesting enough, Trump hobnobs Kissinger a lot. I almost said Kushner, which he hobnobs a lot with him too, much to my dismay, but that's beside the point. And Kissinger, it's funny because you have this guy who was pretty much crazy, saying, "Oh yeah, we need to do to China what we did to Russia. We need to get Russia on our side to ice out China." I guess apparently, according to Kissinger, we just had to oscillate between the two until the end of time. Oh, China's too powerful, got to go to Russia. Russia's too powerful, got to go to China. And yeah, that's gonna work out. Like you can do that like once, maybe twice, but beyond that,
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't see
Especially
much.
within recent memory, like at least give it a century
Yeah,
before you try that again. And I'm very sure there are Russians who would like to see that happen. Of course, the problem is they're liberals, and they don't really jive with the rest of Russian society. Uh, so, if you're going to make friends with Russia, you're going to make concessions culturally as well. Well, I mean, that's not going to work with the direction that the West is headed. So, Russia, it's going to be a really long time, if ever, that Russia has, child drag discos.
yeah, and like I said, I'm not sure whether I said this at the beginning of the show or whether it was off air, but uh, I did say this at some point in the show. But if the populists take control of Europe, which they very well could, especially with what's happening there, Russia may have that like other ends if they don't necessarily. Like I said, Russia and China, their relationship was born out of convenience, but I'm sure other ties have been forged there. But if the Russians can also turn westward to the Europeans that don't behave like the liberals and the neoliberals, they're gonna sit down with the Salvinis and the Orbans and the Kurz from Austria of the world. But you get my point, and
Yeah, yeah.
I've said this before.
And in a sense, that process has already started. That process has already begun. I mean, Trump, anytime Orban has problems with the EU, where does Orban go? Within
he goes to
days,
Moscow.
Moscow.
Yeah. And they back off quick, and it shows the level that the level Russia's still able to project power, not even militarily, but just diplomatically.
Yes, absolutely. They know that if they push Eastern Europe too hard, they will willingly go with Russia, and they can't afford to do that.
Yeah, and even some of Western Europe, they know that they push that too hard. Though, like, look at what the Italians are doing, which we'll get into right now. So, Italian Deputy Prime Minister, Interior Minister, and all-around face of the government, Matteo Salvini, we've discussed him at length on the show, is facing an investigation, possibly 15 years in prison, for his handling of migrant and NGO boats. Now, this is an obviously politicized move. Now, most people would say, looking at it, oh, it's just his political opponents within Italy trying to get rid of him. But no, I go as far as to say this is another color revolution. I expect another wave to hit Europe soon, just based on the way things have been going. Now, uh, Salvini, of course, he's not made it a secret that, yeah, I want to improve relations with Russia. I'm not a fan of this liberalism thing. Now, of course, he makes concessions such as things on Zionism and statements on Venezuela. But again, compared to a lot of other Western leaders, it's pretty insignificant. But that, again, that's beside the point. But things I think are brewing in Europe where they're going to try to get their last-ditch efforts in for these color revolutions, which may blow up in their face and backfire. So that may be a point of optimism. Now, there were protests in Hungary at the end of last year into the beginning of this year over the so-called slave laws, where they tried to skew some labor reform in Hungary as basically saying, oh, it's like legalized slavery for gypsies or whatever. Basically, the most lazy Western propaganda you can cook up at this point is what they're throwing out because, again, it's a sign of desperation. It honestly becomes funny at a point. Now, there have also been protests in Serbia, and of course Macedonia has been getting their fair share of oh, we think we're going to join the EU. They tried this in Moldova, but it backfired. Montenegro just joined NATO, but you see that they're doing their final push, these color revolutions, and I think it's probably out of sign desperation. Maybe I'm being a bit too optimistic, but again, they're pushing all this, and I don't think it's going to end well for them.
Yeah, I would agree. In a way, the push that they're making in these tiny and rather insignificant countries to be a part of NATO, there's no wide consensus in these countries. Should there ever be a war or a conflict, for them to side on the West? I can assure you that if there was some low intense war, kind of like another Ukraine going on, but say closer to home in the Balkans. And if Montenegro and Macedonia were involved, you would see defections. You would see all kinds of black market tearing where they
Yeah,
would.
how many Macedonian Montenegrin militias do you think would join in Serbia?
Yeah, of course, right? They would like they would be completely disloyal. Montenegro and Macedonia are doing this because it's a question of just survival.
Yeah, it's like
They're
we'll let you roll over us, just don't give us the child drag shows.
Well, even that's not assured. The thing is
Yeah,
these
yeah,
companies,
but they think
their
they can buy
factories are
their way
bought
out of
out.
it. Yeah,
Yeah, their factories are bought out, and then there's no jobs, and that creates a brain drain and a sense of desperation. And you have young people living with their parents for a very long time because there really isn't anywhere to go. Um, unless you're gifted with a lot of intelligence, a trade, and you can move to another part of Europe, preferably Germany or Britain or Denmark or whatever.
yeah, go be a doctor in
That's been the
Germany or
process
Western
for the
Europe.
last 20 years. I mean,
I said, yeah, like you see, like a lot of Eastern European doctors in Western Europe. That's a big one.
that's right. That's right. We should actually talk about that because Orban has been trying to, as you know, there's more. Hungary has a depleting population, and the best and brightest are leaving. And Orban has introduced like free housing and all kinds of methods to try to bring them back. It is a desperate situation, and the reason for these so-called slave laws is because there's a worker shortage, and he's caught between a rock and a hard place, having to decide whether to take care of refugees that could one day work and become citizens there, and how that would disrupt, Hungarian life, and most Hungarians don't want them there. So that's where the tension lies, right?
Yeah.
Is how to go
Also,
on.
in terms of like the um, pro population, pro demographics policies, what the Italians started doing is they're actually granting plots of land to couples who have 3 kids that are together for like I think 5 years or something. But point being is, you're seeing these policies arise in these countries in Europe that were frankly pushing regime change in. But yeah, I digress.
Right. And, the main problem with the so-called slave laws, of course, is to increase the amount of hours. The hours now are like over 100 more than they were. I think they were at 250. They can now, if I'm not mistaken. The problem is sometimes the pay doesn't, but again, it's voluntary. It's if you want to. This is, of course. And that's where the protests have largely come from. But I think if you look at the whole picture about where I think, I empathize with this one.
Yeah. But I just let you know you're cutting out a little. But as I was saying about these protests, I think it's a series of last-ditch efforts. And I think in 2019, 2020, the coming years, you're going to see a lot less Ukraines and a lot more Moldovas where they openly protest against the protests they try to push in these countries.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. It's already swung. Um, you know, I've been to Macedonia, and everyone. It's an open secret that the protests are funded by Soros. I've said in previous shows. I've actually spoken to some of the organizers who, like, outright said Soros pays me, and I don't care. um, but it. People without much of a choice are easily persuaded one way or the other.
Yeah. And speaking of Ukraine, I know you're going to like this topic. So, as I said at the top of the show, we are 2 months out from the Ukrainian elections. Now, the front runners at 19% in first place are Volodymyr Zelensky. He's a comedian, which I'll get into him later because he's actually a pretty interesting choice. At 18.2% in second place is none other than Yulia Tymoshenko, the Ukrainian Hillary Clinton, a good buddy with John McCain before his untimely demise. And at 15%, trailing in third place, is incumbent Petro Poroshenko, the Candyman. Now, several more candidates are running, but these are the three that everyone. It's going to be one of these three, is my point. Now, the
Yeah.
front runner, just by barely, Zelensky, has some interesting positions. He supported the Maidan, he supported the protest, he supported the war in Donbass, but he wants to negotiate with the Russians to end the war in Donbass. He doesn't want to speak to the leaders of Donetsk and Luhansk because he views them as Russian puppets, but he would consider holding a referendum in these regions.
Yeah, that's pretty significant. That is not going to make certain sectors of the Pentagon happy, or the CIA, or even Brussels. Let alone Britain. Of course, I'm talking about the governments and their elites. I'm not talking about the average citizen.
Yeah, your average citizen doesn't give a damn about Ukraine. Like, most of them don't even know where it is, and even if they did, they would be like, "Why are we there? What's the reason?"
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's a very positive development, and he's playing his political cards the right way. He's been on the right side, but he wants the negotiations.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would say he's actually the perfect leader for where Ukraine stands politically, not just like the government, but like the people.
Yeah, I think they've had it with the war. Ukraine has not been able to take over those areas. A referendum would be good. Uh, the kind of disaster that I think Ukraine and America had thought when Maidan was happening would be that Russia would steamroll, and everything from the Donbass to Odessa would fall under Russian hands. But of course, Russia didn't do that. It didn't take the bait, and it created. If Ukraine became an anti-Russia state, Novorossiya in the Donbass became an anti-Russia state, and that has been a brilliant move. It's kept attention from Crimea away, and it has preoccupied Ukraine to its limit.
Yeah, and I mean, you have both Timoshenko and Poroshenko. They both say, "Oh, we're going to get Crimea back one day," but Zelensky's like, Yeah, we may not get it back. We will have to talk to the Russians about that one. And interesting that you bring up Timoshenko and how the Europeans will probably react to someone like Zelensky. I would say the favorite of the U.S., of course, the U.S. deep state and the EU, is likely Timoshenko. Even especially when you consider she was one of the people that they thought putting in power during the 2013-2014 coup. For some reason, they went with Poroshenko. I don't know why, but I will say expect a manufactured crisis against Zelensky in the coming months, whether it be some criminal investigation, whether it be like an assassination attempt, but expect something to happen to him that will not play out in his favor.
I would agree. And it'll be a desperate move because it will destabilize and polarize Ukraine even further. And but it won't polarize Novorossiya. It will polarize Ukraine itself, uh, because life for Ukrainians is far worse than it was 5 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And Russia still hasn't cut off the gas, and their conquest, they're still piping energy to them.
Right, but they're wreaking havoc on America with this polar vortex that Putin has called in. So
Oh, yeah. I
you
mean,
never know when they can change their minds like that.
you didn't know the Russians have developed weather warfare. Who would have known?
I thought these conspiracy theories were all on the right.
Yeah. I thought it was the U.S. I thought it was the CIA. I thought it was HARP developing the weather warfare. Apparently, the Russians beat us to it.
Yeah, Madhow is just something.
Oh yeah. Who would have known? They always say beware of the Russian winter, but who would have thought they would start exporting their winter? Yeah, none
I
of us could
know.
have. We've been
Russia's
blindsided.
secret weapon.
Just crown Putin king of Earth right now. Just crown him. Just crown him emperor. He's won.
Yeah. They literally weaponized the weather that always helped them. So sorry, guys.
We can't do it now. Now to move on to probably the most anticipated topic of the show, finish out the last 20 minutes with this, is the great country of Venezuela, and we went at length on this last week, but there's more to be discussed, of course. Now, the U.S. has appointed none other than Elliot Abrams to the State Department Task Force on Venezuela. You saw him at the UN saying, "Oh, we need to support the Venezuelan opposition." Now, keep in mind, Abrams was one of the architects of the Iraq War, a Bush guy from a certain group. We will not say the name of, but I believe you know what we're talking about. You can just tell by his name. Now, interesting developments out of Venezuela is Maduro, no surprise, back U.S. diplomats because Pompeo came out and said, "Oh, we don't recognize you. You don't have the authority to spell diplomats." And Maduro probably just out of self-preservation said, "It's not worth it. I'm not going to forcefully expel these diplomats and start a war because that's exactly what they want me to do." The guy's not as dumb as he looks. I'm not saying he's any genius by any means, but he's not as dumb as he looks. Now, on Tuesday, John Bolton came out of his security meeting with a notepad facing towards the camera that said, quote, 5,000 troops to Colombia. Now, three officials from the Department of Defense came out and later refuted this. Now, at first, I thought maybe this is a purposeful diversion. I know Trump does some wackery, but again, out of all the people under Trump's influence, John Bolton is not one of them, and I could see him making a dumb move like this.
Yeah, Venezuela is a tragic scenario. If America hadn't placed sanctions on Venezuela in the first place, a lot of bad things could have also been averted. They wouldn't have become some kind of a powerhouse.
Yeah, they would not have become
that's
like
obvious, but
jewel of Latin America. But we wouldn't have the crisis we have in our hands right now if we just took a hands-off policy.
Exactly, and we discussed this last show that if actual deals were being made in the last 10 years, since what was it? Well, it was more than 10 years that America tried to have a coup in Venezuela in 2002. That failed, and it didn't exactly warm Venezuelans, at least a good sector of them, towards America. So there's already a level of mistrust, and this is very bad policy because the West right now is facing issues that are only going to become more pointed and more complex and even more violent in the next 20 years. They have to deal with demographics and a lack of social cohesion. Disrupting Venezuela eventually will mean um, will mean more refugees at the border. And we will not be in a spot where we can morally say we have the right to topple government, set up puppets, and, you know, freeze gold assets of a certain country, but also they can't come here. That's not tenable, and the left is going to pounce on that.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's interesting because we did not do much to warm ourselves to Chavez in 2002 when we tried to overthrow him. Similar to Castro. I mean, you look at a figure like Castro, he was an opportunist. Eisenhower could have, met with him and say, "Look, we'll cut you a deal. We'll get some of the U.S. influence out of there. But if you stay in our sphere, you can have your independent Cuba. You can pretend to be the revolutionary." But instead, we try to kill the guy, and he goes to the Soviet Union. We did pretty much the same thing with Venezuela. Tried to kill Chavez, he goes to the Russians, to the Chinese. Now, we had a golden opportunity that we did not have with Castro. Chavez suffers an untimely death, and then all of a sudden he's succeeded by a guy who used to be a bus driver. And this guy, like I said, I'm not going to push the anti-Maduro propaganda that a lot of these people push, but I'm not going to pretend like he's some genius, some political pioneer that will lead Venezuela to great areas without U.S. interference. But the thing is, the guy was a former bus driver. We probably could have gone to him behind closed doors and said, "You know what? We'll ease up off you. You just got to work with us on these few things. We'll try to disengage a little." And we could have cut that deal, kind of the deal we're cutting with North Korea, and we could have been absolved this problem. Now, I'd hate to be one of those people who blames the previous president, but that's on Obama. 2014 rolls around, oil prices are low. Obama had a lot of leverage over Venezuela, especially with this guy who's barely ever been in politics. Perfect potential for a deal. I'm not saying if Trump were in the office at the time, he would have done the same thing, but I'm saying somebody somewhere screwed up with that.
Yeah, I would agree. And if Obama had done that, he would have won praise from his base. The GOP would have looked like villains again. It
Yeah,
would
I mean,
have
like Rand Paul would be like, "Yeah, I don't like Obama, but he's doing something right," and the rest of the GOP would just screech.
exactly, and it would have distanced himself from the Bush legacy, which he was badly in need of, considering Syria and Libya. And that didn't happen, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Again, I can understand that. Look, I'm no fan of Obama, but I do like his intentions in Cuba. But I think that was kind of a dead issue. It's not like Cuba was any threat or anything. I agree with him with the embargo, but he should have spent his political capital in that situation on Venezuela when Maduro came to power, and it probably would have worked out a lot better because we could have grifted Venezuela into the U.S. sphere bloodlessly without any American or Venezuelan blood.
Yeah, this is precisely what I'm talking about. And it's just every single place that we go to counter Russia ends up adding to the long-term problem of future social cohesion with consideration to demographics.
Oh,
Every single
absolutely.
place, it has been a disaster. It's not a winning strategy. There had to have been. I mean, the West is still the wealthiest region in the world. America is still the greatest power that's ever existed in the world. How it's been unable to
Always squandered it.
yeah, it's astonishing.
Now, for further news on Venezuela beyond our reminiscing about what could have been, the EU, a body of unelected officials, has given Maduro 8 days to hold elections, which expires tomorrow on Saturday, before they decide to officially recognize Guaido. Now, yesterday, Venezuela was engulfed in another wave of massive protests. Now, I've said, of course, a lot of these protests are provoked by the CIA, provoked by the State Department, but again, living conditions in Venezuela, thanks to pretty much every party involved, are absolutely awful. So some people do just go out and riot because they have no other choice. But little Marco Rubio, Amnesty Marco, has been insufferable on the issue. He's been talking about we need to support Venezuelan freedom, blah, 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 blah. And beyond offering amnesty and trying to start pointless wars, what has Marco Rubio done?
Absolutely nothing. I mean, he's a lobbyist stooge. And basically, he just propounds the American narrative of the reason we're great is because we're a liberal democracy. And if everyone was
Yeah,
a liberal
we are great
democracy, they
because
would be
we are
great
good.
too. Exactly. I mean, in a way, you could see that this divide, this disagreement, it's become a volleyball, of course, but over the last 19, 20 years, it has been in many ways the only glue that in a significant way is keeping America reasonably together. And that glue is becoming less and less effective. A war, another South American, Central American war, the kind that I saw in the late 70s and 80s, is not going to help America.
Oh,
Not in the least.
it's going to be, as we were saying off air, it's going to be that straw that breaks the camel's back. I think it's going to finally push the demographic question. I think it's going to finally put whites as more of a group rather than viewing themselves as individuals. I think it's going to push a lot of things politically where, honestly, a lot of our wars we haven't had to deal with the consequence with. Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, a lot of our meddling in the Middle East, that's been on Europe. Europe has been hit with that. Turkey has been hit with that. But we start one in our backyard, we're going to get hit with it, and a lot of people are going to be pissed off. You know, a lot of the people who champion diversity say, "Oh, we need to let in these poor refugees." You know, they may say that out loud, but in their head, they're going to be thinking, "This is a disaster. This is an absolute mistake," and they're not going to openly agree with us, but in their heart, in their mind, they are going to agree with us.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, all these conflicts now basically feed into the narrative of the conflict within America about whether it's going to go into a leftist progressive uh, future, or if
Internationalist.
it's going to be a civic nationalist future. Everything that happens externally to America still comes back to this, and Venezuela will become about demographics, which it wasn't. Central America wasn't. The Americas were never those issues in the 70s and 80s, and now they will be. That is the volleyball I was talking about. Back then, it was the leftists who didn't want any meddling there, and now it's the people on the right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of like liberals beyond like very far left people in this country, beyond your Tulsi Gabbards, which far left possibly, there'd be like, oh, you know what, they need revolution, they need democracy, but beyond that, several U.S. aircraft have landed in Colombia today. It makes you wonder about that notepad. Now, the propaganda
Yeah,
machine. What?
yeah. I just chuckled. Yeah.
Oh, but the propaganda machine has been out in full force over this past week. There are now claims that Maduro is kidnapping children to build a child soldier army, and also that he's holding Guaido's family hostage. Now, let me guess, does he have chemical weapons too? I bet that, or have they exhausted that one? There's only Assad does that.
He's gonna barrel bomb Guaido. Oh my
Oh,
God, the tragedy. What did we become?
oh, when Syria said they supported Guaido, they supported Maduro. Excuse me. They must have sent some of their special forces over there. They must have sent like, okay, this is how you do this. Okay, look, they're gonna tell you there's chemical weapons. There's not gonna be chemical weapons. You just gotta go with it. Just find a bunker when the missiles come.
I know.
Yeah, but
I'm weary. I'm weary of the. I saw those headlines as well. I don't know what to say about them. Honestly, I have no idea whether they're true or not.
now, from a lot of people, there's been push for U.S. involvement, of course. But here's some of the arguments they like to make, and I'm going to go through a little debunking of them. Now, many are exaggerating the Russian role in Venezuela. From my observation, they seem to be grabbing what they can before the country collapses, whether that be gold, other natural resources. And you know what? Good on them for their foresight. They got in early. They did what we should have done, like I said, in 2014. And you know what? They can plunder away before they get the hell out, because at this point, no matter what, we're not getting any, which I'll get into later. Now, many, this one especially frustrates me, cite the Monroe Doctrine for a reason to get involved in Venezuela. Now, as Ann Coulter put it with her interview on Bill Maher last week, you know what's a lot closer to us in Venezuela? You know what's actually in our backyard more than Venezuela? Texas and Arizona, of course, in reference to immigration. Another reason the Monroe Doctrine does not hold up here is that the Monroe Doctrine was designed to counter military actions by foreign powers, like when France invaded Mexico under Napoleon III. By this logic, we should have driven Spain out of Cuba and Puerto Rico much sooner than we actually did. And don't even get me started about the massive British presence in America that we didn't even bother to drive out. Another point that's been overlooked is that if the U.S. invades, there will not be any plunder. What isn't en route to Russia and China by the time we get there will be destroyed in a scorched earth campaign.
Yeah, I think that was a great point. I'll be honest, I didn't even think of that. All I could focus on was, even if this is a bloodless coup, the IMF loans that are going to be put on Venezuela, and indeed just basically it will do what it did to Ukraine. It will take out all its resources, and it will be a puppet state for the IMF. And that over a protracted period of time will mean refugees at the border.
Yeah, I mean, wars for usury. I guess that wars for oil. That's child's play. That is 2000. That is 2003 level stuff. We are fighting wars for usury now.
Yeah, exactly.
But further on the question which we got into last week of what destroyed Venezuela. Now, the two answers, depending on who you ask, are going to be sanctions or socialism. Now, keep in mind, the Eastern Bloc survived both. Poland, Romania, Hungary, under communism, under socialism. I know they all had their own names for it. It's very complex. They did not collapse how Venezuela did. They were under both U.S. sanctions and a more planned economy. Iran has also survived a varied form of socialism and heavy U.S. sanctions, very heavy U.S. sanctions when we're talking about Iran. Simply put, the Venezuelans have not been able to govern themselves and manage their country since the Spanish left, and anyone who's tried it after them, it's been more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah, that's right. And sanctions on Venezuela over a protracted period of time has not helped anybody. It's helped only a very small number of people. America hasn't benefited from it. Americans, I'm afraid, will suffer because of it. The best thing you can do for these countries is actually help them succeed so that they don't look to America as a refuge.
Yeah, like I said, take
again,
a hands-off approach, cut deals with them.
Right, but that's also part of the mythology, right? I mean, the mythology, it seems like, especially as an outsider, that the narrative that gets pushed when America isn't feeling good about itself it gets validated when it's the refuge for all the people of the world, and honestly, there is a time limit on that. That can't be true always. And
yeah.
as much as it's a feel-good statement to make, and to a certain extent, that's true in Canada as well. I remember once I was at a house party and there was a Serbian poet that was there, and he had decided that he was going back, and some of his relatives were there, and there were Canadians there. There were Anglo Canadians, and I mean they were honestly hurt. They were hurt that he was going back. How could he go back? So I think it's very much within the the American and Canadian mystique, to be validated by people wanting to come here.
I will say this: we were founded more so American than Canada as a secular country. I mean, a lot of people call America a Christian nation, which is true by many aspects when you consider how the population is, what the culture is. And, I would prefer the population were more religious, but that's a topic for a different day. But to replace the state religion, to replace our religious, I don't know what you call it, symbolism, we propped up secular liberalism as a god and decided this is the religion we need to spread. So, well, I mean, a lot of the founding fathers, I think this is something they overlooked. Great thinkers, great men. I mean, a lot of them were actually pretty non-interventionists. They warned against foreign conflicts we're in today. But I mean, what was it? I think it was Adams that said we are the friends of liberty everywhere, but the custodians of our own. Now that's been thrown completely out the window, where we are the global guarantors of liberty across the world, apparently.
Yeah, child drag shows just don't happen on their own.
Oh, of course not. How dare you go to church in the evenings on a weekday? That's unacceptable. It should be a child drag show, and that is the MO of liberalism.
That's I know, and celebrating, partial birth abortion. like New York celebrating that. I mean, it's astounding to me.
Yeah, and the fact that we think we have the morality to dictate the rest of the world, they look at us and they laugh. They look at these pride parades. They they look at everything we do, and then we try to say the Russians are bad because they shut down some event or something. And alternatively, you look at what's happening in France. That they make Putin look soft. And France is another country that has that liberal spirit after they pretty much rejected the church, rejected God, and decided they were going to make liberalism their God. And they're another country that's in flames now, not to the point where we are, at least in terms of the social degeneracy. Now it is there, but what's happening there is mostly the people actually fighting back against that. Good on them. Yellow vests, I support wholeheartedly. But that's another country that tries to lecture how you should run your country, and people look at them. It's like, aren't your own people burning down your country right now?
I know we're going now into the 12th consecutive weekend of protests. Several people have died. Several dozens have lost their eyes. Um, and now they're trying to create counter protests. The headline I read this week was "Yellow Jacket protests too white."
No, you mean France, that country that's like 90 something percent white? How are the white people there?
Too white. It's just too white. But and this is what we mean when in the past episodes where we've spoken about how to use minorities in order to quell and suppress nationalism. Um, no movement is legitimate unless it's diverse, and if it's diverse, it's going to have cross purposes, and there won't be full agreement, and that's the way it works.
Apparently so, but yeah, I'm not happy about the Venezuela situation at all. I don't think it's going to end well for us, even if we were to take just a hands-off policy tomorrow. I think that ship has set sail, and
Yeah,
unfortunately, it's heading towards the Gulf of Mexico.
yeah. It's honestly the best thing now we can do is to try to contain it and minimize it as much as possible and stop any kind of escalation.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just
Like
hope
like I said, the best thing to come out of this is it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So yeah, out of all the chaos, we may get one good thing out of it. You know what? Maybe maybe that's what's meant to be. I don't know how much you or the audience believe in fate or
I
anything like
agree with
that.
you on that.
Yeah.
I agree with you. This could if in a year or two there's a million refugees, half of them Venezuelan, the other one's pretending to be Venezuelan, then I think that's it. That is going to be the camel because now it will really hit home. Instead of Europe, taking it for America in the Middle East, we're going to have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you have these migrant caravans, like I think we're on the third one that's heading towards the border. They haven't had much of an impact because they're just coming from economically dilapidated areas. But when you have them coming from a war zone, people are going to think, oh, how many of these people were former militiamen? How many of these people are going to start the Venezuelan MS-13? How many of these people, in assuming we put U.S. troops there, how many of these people killed our soldiers? It's going to raise a lot of questions, especially on the right wing. And you know what?
Yeah.
Fortunately, beyond like the neocons, beyond like a lot of the normicons, I see a lot of people on the right pushing back against this. Like, I mean, they'll start out with the qualifier. I don't like socialism, but it's not our problem. Which I'll take that over pretty much anything. But yeah,
Yeah.
beyond a lot of the mainstream conservatives, a lot of right wingers are pushing back against this, even more so than the left wingers.
Yeah, they are because I think now the pattern is understood. The America and the West have been involved in like endless wars for the last. I mean, if you count from the Persian Gulf, it's been nonstop war for 30 years, and then the pattern is obvious now.
Yeah, the mask can slip. And, like I said, Trump, for all his faults, he's forced them into a position where they got sloppy. They accelerated their plans. And you know what? That may be his greatest accomplishment at the end of the day. And if so, I would say he did a pretty damn good job.
I would agree. Yeah, I don't get the sense that this was his decision. I don't. I mean, I'll never be able to prove it, but one wonders
Yeah,
who's really in
it's
charge.
very out of character considering the fact he's willing to talk to. You know, a lot of people bring up the arguments like, "Oh, Maduro's illegitimate because he wasn't democratically elected," which we can get in that debate. I think the Venezuelan people, I think they probably kind of have a thing where they don't view democracy the same way we do. They view it as, oh, he's in power. Things aren't too bad. I mean, I'm not saying things in Venezuela aren't too bad, but like he's in power, might as well not rock the boat. But the point being, if you want to talk about how legit elections illegitimized leader, why have we met with Vladimir Putin? Why have we met with Kim Jong Un? Why have we met with Xi Jinping, who just declared himself president for life? Why have we met with all the leaders of the Gulf states? Why have we met with Mohammed bin Salman and the leaders of Qatar and all the, we had that entire summit in Saudi Arabia with all the Gulf monarchies. Why have we met with them if we have to meet with leaders that are only democratically elected? It's a dumb premise. And I agree it's a dumb premise. I don't care if other countries elect their leaders, so long as they're not meddling with our affairs, so long as they're not messing with us. I frankly don't care that Jordan has a king.
Yeah, and this again comes down to this kind of validation. Something has happened for us in the West where um, if we can't make, I mean, it's a kind of a disbelief. Like subconsciously, we ourselves disbelieve in democracy, and it makes us want to push it harder on everyone else
Yeah,
because
it's classic
validates
projection.
it validates our kind of unconscious and negative position on it. Our doubts are alleviated momentarily.
Oh, and just to end out the show, apparently on Tucker Carlson tonight, he did a segment on woke billionaires. So a little bit of good news to leave you off with. Maybe things will go our way at least on some fronts. But thank you all for tuning in. This has been a very interesting episode. At least I think so. We'll see you all next week, and goodbye.